Good morning. It is truly wonderful to be with you all. Thank you for your kind welcome, and thank you especially to Lucy and to Ayla for all that they have done to make this visit happen and for inviting me to preach this morning. Around the time that Lucy asked me to preach on these readings, we at St. Bart's were planning to welcome a transatlantic visitor of our own. In our case, a priest from London by the name of Jarrell Robinson Brown. You may know Father Jarrell. He serves at a parish only a few miles from here. In the research I did ahead of Jarrell's visit, I came across a podcast he recorded with a London anti-racist educator named Jess Malley. About halfway through that podcast, Jess asked Jarrell why, as a priest in the Church of England, he wrote that the church must be abolished. In response to Jess's query, Jarrell made a striking declaration. If the church truly wanted to be what Jesus had envisioned, he said, it would need to become something weaker, poorer, humbler, much more willing to give its life for the life of the world, not so concerned about self-preservation and growth. We have all these buildings in lots of places, he noted. A lot of them are empty. A lot of them were built at a time when the church was very different. They may not be filled again. What if we closed these churches? Jarrell asked provocatively, and sold the empty buildings, trusting in God's greater plan for the world, and then used that money to open up food banks and for other good purposes. What if, he asked, we started looking to the future without clinging to the past? Jarrell told Jess that he deplored the tendency at play both within and outside the church to pursue self-preservation at any cost. Jesus, he reminded listeners, called his disciples to give up their lives, to take up their cross and follow him. Dietrich Bonhoeffer famously asserted that when Christ calls a person, he bids them come and die. Indeed, Jarrell pointed out, many of Jesus' disciples actually did lose their lives. Peter himself, as scandalized as he might have been by Jesus' own death, was eventually crucified. Even in death, however, Jarrell claimed that Jesus' disciples were healthier for following him. Healthiness, Jarrell explained, comes from a kind of death, a death that leads to the deepest, truest kind of life. A lot of the problems we see in the world, he said, we see in people who don't want to die. Jarrell's musings really resonated with me as I approached a 3-month sabbatical from the rigors of post-COVID parish ministry, the same sabbatical that finds me with you today. The world of 2023 is very different from the world of 2019, and the world of 1950, and the world of 1662, and the world of 1549. Still, clergy people like me, even in contexts as progressive and sophisticated as mine, often hear from our parishioners about how great things were in the good old days, about how if we only tried a little harder and a little smarter, if we only stopped making so many darn changes to the ways we do things, we might easily slide back to that simpler, better time. A former bishop of mine was rarely able to stop talking about something he called the death of Christendom. By this, my former bishop did not mean the end of the practice of Christianity, or even the abolition of the church as the community of people who believe in Jesus Christ. But he did intend to suggest that the church in its present form as an institution, at least in certain parts of the world, is struggling mightily to keep up with the world around it, and will inevitably crumble in the face of mounting pressures. My former bishop's constant mentions of Christendom's death did not endear him to his clergy, enamored as they were with their elaborate liturgies and strong pension funds, or his parishioners, enamored as they were with their glorious buildings and favorite hymns. The rank and file wanted something more optimistic, more positive, more hopeful. And I could see their point. But I've increasingly come to realize just how right my former bishop was. The way the church as an institution has been living has become undeniably unsustainable. Those of us who do the work of the church day in and day out, whether as clergy or paid staff or volunteers, all of us are aware, when we are honest with ourselves, that we won't get back to the way things were. Perhaps in the UK, this reality is a bit more obvious than it is in the US. In my country, we can still point to those exceptional churches that are overflowing with people and or money, though they are becoming rarer even there. Ultimately, most of us know that things have entirely changed, yet we still yearn to live in a past that is already long gone. We don't want to die. Some may think that a faithful Christian response to the church's current challenges is to try harder, to fight the good fight, to labor even more vigorously within the vineyard, to communicate even more forcefully and compellingly with all the latest tools, to endlessly tinker and fine-tune, to resist death in every way, no matter the effort, no matter the cost. In Matthew's gospel, however, Jesus suggests that Christians should pursue a very different approach to death. For Jesus, it is obvious that death, like suffering, is necessary. Death is unavoidable. It should be accepted and embraced. If you read this morning's assigned passage from the Gospels in the context of the larger 16th chapter of Matthew, you'll notice that Jesus tells Peter and the other disciples about his death immediately after giving Peter the keys to the kingdom and making him head of the church. That earlier portion of Matthew's 16th chapter was assigned to last Sunday, but considering the two portions together might help us see Jesus' message to Peter and the other disciples as a message also to the wider church. Immediately after forming the church, Jesus tells that new church that suffering and death are inevitable and important. That as followers of him, we should always choose challenge and suffering over ease and success. The fact that Jesus uses such strong language, that he calls Peter, the head of the church, Satan, underlines just how fervently he feels. Jesus knows that we want to run away from suffering and death, and still he points us ever more steadfastly towards it. He asks us to set our minds not on human things, but on divine ones. And ironically, of course, the very thing that defines our humanity, our mortality, is what we must learn to cherish if we want to do the will of the divine. Around the time that Lucy asked me to preach on these readings, just before Jarrell visited us in New York, I took my own trip to Toronto to visit an elderly woman named Jeannie. In the midst of the worst days of COVID-19, Jeannie had found St. Bart's on the internet. For a variety of reasons, including disability and differences in theological perspectives, Jeannie did not feel comfortable returning to churches in her area as COVID abated. Some might argue that we at St. Bart's should have pushed Jeannie harder to find a local church. But our clergy decided to respect Jeannie's own decision to become one of us. A few months before my visit, Jeannie asked for a Zoom meeting with me. She told me that she had end-stage muscular dystrophy and that she was dying. Moreover, she had made a decision. She would enroll in a Canadian government program called Medical Assistance in Dying. She told me that she had suffered for a long time, that she knew death was coming, that she was ready. She was aware that certain Christians and other religious people disapproved of such a decision. And she asked me what I thought. At first, I neither approved nor disapproved. In truth, I was more stunned than anything else. What Jeannie was contemplating isn't legal where I live, in most of the rest of the United States, or here in the UK. I had considered it only as a hot-button theoretical issue debated by politicians, as a hypothetical practice that might be possible at some point in the future. Now, sitting across the Zoom screen from me, with hardly a warning, it was real, and it was now. Having heard directly from Jeannie, I could see that the path that she had chosen made sense for her, that she had a healthy understanding of what was to come, that she was welcoming death for the right reasons and at the right time. When I visited Jeannie in Toronto, those initial hunches were confirmed. I spent only an hour with Jeannie, the person who for 2 years or so had been merely a box on a screen. I inhabited with her the space in which she had lived for decades. I heard about her joy, her pain, her faith. I handed her an official certificate of membership at St. Bart's. I hugged her, and then I said goodbye. On August 1st, the very day on which I began my sabbatical, Jeannie died, just as she had planned. For some, Jeannie's death might have been the regrettable result of medical and legislative malpractice. For others, Jeannie's death might have represented a laudable victory in a series of battles for individual self-determination. For me, Jeannie's death seemed to be the prayerful act of a deeply faithful Christian woman. Jeannie was not running towards her death, but she was also not running away from it. She knew that she was going to die, and her death was a fact that she accepted. She was at peace. She believed deep in her heart that God was calling her home. Not everyone is so fortunate to have such clarity at the end. So many rage and rage in the face of a force to which we will all eventually succumb. God forbid it, Lord. This must never happen to you or to our church or to me. I'm grateful for Jeannie's example, for what she taught me about the power of accepting death's difficult truth. I'm grateful, too, for Jesus' words to that other Peter, who also had trouble accepting what was inevitable. And I pray for all of us as a church and as individuals. when we ourselves stare death in the eye, may we have faith. Faith in God and faith in the resurrection of Jesus Christ. May we know that even as we die, especially as we die, we are walking in Jesus' footsteps, that we are doing what Jesus did, that we are going where he has gone before. Amen.